Leo had never seen a world like this before. The planet Zirath was unlike anything he had imagined. It was a harsh place, full of red deserts and towering mountains. The colony was just a small speck of life among the vast emptiness of the land. The air smelled different, fresh yet unfamiliar. But for Leo it was home now, or at least it would be for a while. As a scientist and explorer, Leo had always been fascinated by the unknown. He had volunteered to come to Zirath because it was a chance to discover something new, something no human had ever seen. The colony was just starting to build itself up, and many of the colonists were still afraid of the unknown creatures that roamed the planet. Most of them stayed within the protective walls of the settlement, keeping their distance from the wilderness beyond. Leo, however, was not afraid. He was curious. He believed that if humans and the native species could understand each other, they might find a way to live in peace. He had seen the potential for that peace in the stories of other explorers who had made contact with alien species across the galaxy. But Zirath was different. This planet was not like the others. The creatures here were not friendly or welcoming. They were strong, fierce, and dangerous. One morning, after breakfast, Leo set out on one of his usual walks. He had made a habit of exploring the wild outskirts of the colony. He wanted to learn about the land, the plants, and, most importantly, the creatures that called Zirath home. He had learned about the Zorath, the warrior species that ruled the deserts and mountains of the planet. They were said to be huge, towering over 10 feet tall, with skin like hardened stone and muscles that rippled like flowing water. They were known for their strength and their warlike ways, and the colony's leaders had made it clear that the humans should stay away from them. But Leo wasn't afraid. He knew that fear only created more fear. He believed that if given the chance, these creatures could become allies, not enemies. That day, as Leo walked through the dry, sun-baked landscape, he found himself on a narrow path between two rocky cliffs. The air was hot and the ground beneath him was cracked and dry. But Leo was used to it by now. He walked with purpose, his mind on the many mysteries he had yet to uncover on this strange world. Then suddenly he heard something, a low, rumbling sound. It was like the growl of an animal, but deeper, more powerful. Leo stopped and looked around. The sound was getting closer. He turned his head slowly, his heart beating faster. There, standing at the end of the path, was the last thing he expected to see. The creature was massive, easily 10 feet tall, with skin that looked like dark, rough stone. Its armor gleamed in the sunlight, and its eyes burned with an intensity that made Leo's skin crawl. The Zorath warrior was standing perfectly still, watching Leo with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through him. Leo felt a mix of fear and awe. He had read about the Zorath, but seeing one up close was something entirely different. This alien was not like the peaceful beings Leo had encountered on other worlds. This one was powerful, and it was looking directly at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Leo could feel the tension in the air like a storm was brewing. He knew that he had only one chance to make a good impression. If he made a mistake, it could be his last. Taking a deep breath, Leo took a step forward. The Zorath's eyes narrowed, but it did not move. Leo continued walking slowly, trying to remain calm. "Hello?" Leo said in a soft, clear voice. "I'm Leo. I come in peace." The Zorath did not respond. It only stared at him, its muscles rippling beneath the heavy armor. Leo could feel the weight of its gaze, like a heavy stone pressing down on him. "I don't want any trouble," Leo said, trying to sound confident. "I just want to understand you, to learn from you." Still, the Zorath did not move. It was as if Leo's words meant nothing. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then the Zorath did something unexpected. It tilted its head slightly, as if considering Leo's words. Leo froze, unsure of what would happen next. Would the warrior attack him? Would it communicate in some way? But instead of attacking, the Zorath lowered its massive weapon and stepped aside, allowing Leo to pass. Leo's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what the warrior was thinking, but he had made it past the first test. Slowly, carefully, he walked past the alien, his eyes fixed on the warrior's massive form. As he passed, he could feel the heat radiating off its armor, and he couldn't help but glance up at the warrior's face. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, and Leo saw something unexpected. It wasn't just the cold, unfeeling gaze of a warrior. There was something else there, a flicker of curiosity, a spark of something deeper. Leo continued walking, his mind racing. What did that look mean? Did the warrior actually understand him? Or had he simply been lucky? Whatever the answer, Leo knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. He would need to come back. He had to find out more about the Zorath. There was something important here, something that could change everything for the future of the colony. As Leo walked back toward the colony, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just encountered something extraordinary. He had seen the Kiara giant warrior's power and strength, but he had also seen something else. A glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humans and the Zorath could find a way to work together. Maybe Leo would be the one to make that happen. The next few days after Leo's first encounter with the Zorath warrior were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Leo had returned to the colony, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment when he had stood face to face with the giant alien. He wondered what the Zorath had really been thinking. Was it truly peaceful? Or was it just waiting for the right moment to strike? Despite his curiosity, Leo couldn't shake the unease that gripped him. The other colonists were already talking about his encounter. Some whispered about how brave Leo was, while others were worried. They knew that the Zorath were dangerous. No one had ever tried to befriend one before. The idea of trying to communicate with such a creature seemed reckless, even foolish to many of them. Leo tried to keep his focus on his work, but the whispers of fear followed him wherever he went. They grew louder each day. People asked him questions about the Zorath, and some even warned him to stay away from the creature. "They're not like us, Leo," they said. "You can't trust them. They've never shown kindness." But Leo wasn't listening. He had made up his mind. He wasn't afraid. He had seen something in the Zorath's eyes, something more than just an instinct to fight. He had seen the smallest hint of curiosity, of understanding. It was a flicker, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make him believe that the warrior was not just a mindless killer. The next day, Leo returned to the same path where he had first encountered the warrior. He had thought about bringing something, a gift maybe, but he wasn't sure what would be appropriate for a creature so different from anything human. Instead, he just brought himself. The human way, he thought, was to offer his presence, to show that he was not afraid. As he walked through the familiar terrain, the sun was already beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and earth. Leo felt the cool breeze against his skin as he walked, his steps steady and sure. He reached the narrow path between the cliffs. His heart raced in his chest, not from fear but from the anticipation of what might happen next. He had no idea if the Zorath would even show up today, but he hoped it would. He hoped that the warrior might see him again, and maybe this time they could have a real conversation. And then, just as he was about to turn a corner, he heard it. The same low rumble, the sound of something large and powerful moving toward him. Leo's heart skipped a beat. He stopped, holding his breath. The Zorath was coming. He turned around slowly, his eyes scanning the rocky landscape. There, just ahead, was the towering figure of the warrior. It was standing still, just like before, watching him with the same intense gaze. The air around them seemed to charge with energy. The warrior's eyes locked onto Leo's, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Leo stood there, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to make any sudden moves that might startle the giant alien. He simply waited, holding his ground. He was not afraid, but he couldn't deny the feeling that this moment was more important than anything else he had ever done. The Zorath finally moved. It took a slow step forward, its massive feet making deep impressions in the ground with every step. The warrior was so tall that Leo had to tilt his head back just to look up at its face. The alien's armor gleamed in the light of the setting sun, and its eyes burned like two bright stars. Leo took a step forward as well. He kept his voice calm, though his heart was racing. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to understand. Can we talk?" The Zorath's eyes flickered for a moment, but it didn't speak. Instead, it raised its arm, pointing to a nearby rock formation. Leo followed the direction of the warrior's finger and saw something strange. There, etched into the side of the rock, were symbols that Leo had never seen before, yet they looked strangely familiar. He stepped closer, intrigued by the markings. The Zorath followed him, keeping its distance but clearly observing. Leo traced his fingers over the symbols, his mind racing. What were they trying to tell him? He couldn't make sense of it, but he had a feeling that the warrior was waiting for him to understand. Then, without warning, the Zorath made a gesture, one that seemed like a question. It raised its hand to its chest and then pointed to Leo. It was as if it was asking if Leo understood the markings. Leo's eyes widened. This wasn't just a simple encounter anymore. The Zorath was trying to communicate. This was a test. Leo could feel it. He could feel the weight of the warrior's gaze waiting for his response. "I don't know what they mean," Leo said softly, looking at the markings. "But I want to learn." The Zorath didn't respond immediately. It just stood there, watching him carefully. The silence stretched between them, but this time Leo didn't feel the same fear. There was no growl, no threat in the air. The warrior wasn't trying to harm him. It was waiting. Leo took another step forward, standing beside the rock. "Can you show me? Can you teach me what these symbols mean?" The Zorath tilted its head slightly as if considering Leo's words. Then, to Leo's surprise, the warrior knelt down. The action was slow and deliberate, but it made Leo feel like he had just witnessed something monumental. The Zorath was lowering itself to Leo's level. It was not the fierce, untouchable warrior that he had imagined. It was showing him respect. For the next few hours, Leo and the Zorath spent time by the rock. The warrior showed him more markings, explaining each one through gestures and expressions. Leo understood that the Zorath had a rich history, one that was deeply tied to the land. They lived on. The markings told stories of battles, honor, and ancient rituals. Leo was amazed. He had never expected this. The Zorath wasn't just a mindless fighter. It was a creature with culture, with traditions, and with a deep connection to its world. And Leo realized something important. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for understanding between their two worlds. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, Leo stood up, looking at the Zorath. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I won't forget this." The warrior stood as well, towering over Leo, its gaze softening for a moment. And then, with a slow nod, the Zorath turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the desert. Leo watched it go, his heart filled with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. There was still much to learn, and the journey ahead was uncertain. But for the first time, Leo felt that he was not alone on this strange planet. He had made a connection, one that might change everything. The days after Leo's second encounter with the Zorath warrior were filled with more questions than answers. He had learned so much from the markings on the rocks and the quiet exchanges he had shared with the Zorath, but there was still so much he didn't understand. The warrior's silent gestures, the ancient symbols, it was clear that the Zorath had a complex and rich culture. But what did it mean for Leo, and what did it mean for the future of the colony? Leo couldn't help but wonder what had caused the Zorath to be so guarded. The warrior had shown him respect, yes, but there was still a wall between them. It wasn't enough to just know the markings or even the stories they told. Leo needed to bridge that gap. He needed to show the warrior that humans were more than just strange newcomers to this world. He had to prove that humanity had the capacity to learn, to grow, and to be trusted. As the days passed, Leo found himself spending more and more time in the desert, near the rock formations where he had met the Zorath. He returned there daily, hoping for another chance to speak to the warrior. Sometimes he would find new markings on the rocks and he would sit and study them, hoping that somehow the warrior would return and help him understand their meaning. But the Zorath did not come every day. It wasn't as if the warrior was avoiding him, but there was always a sense of distance, a sense that the giant alien had its own life to live, its own duties to attend to. Leo didn't mind. He knew that this was how things worked in the world of the Zorath. They were not like humans. They were ancient with their own ways of doing things. One day, after spending hours studying the markings, Leo decided to try something different. Instead of waiting for the Zorath to come to him, he would go to it. He thought that maybe if he could show the warrior that he was willing to make the effort, it might open up more opportunities for communication. So, he packed a small bag with food and water, slung it over his shoulder, and set out into the desert. He had no specific destination in mind, just a feeling that the warrior was out there, somewhere, waiting. The desert was as hot and unforgiving as ever, but Leo didn't mind. He had learned to adapt to the conditions, even if it meant enduring the harsh sun and the dry, dusty air. He kept moving, his eyes scanning the horizon, looking for any sign of the Zorath. Hours passed, and Leo began to feel the weight of the journey. His legs ached from walking and the heat was beginning to drain his energy, but he didn't stop. He pushed on, determined to find the warrior. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the landscape, Leo finally saw something. Far off, in the distance, he spotted a figure. It was tall, unmistakable, a giant figure that seemed to blend into the desert itself. The Zorath was there, standing still, just like before. Leo's heart raced with excitement. He had found the warrior. He quickened his pace, his feet kicking up clouds of dust as he moved toward the giant figure. The Zorath turned its head as Leo approached, its glowing eyes locking onto him. For a moment, there was silence. The desert was still, as if holding its breath. Leo stopped a few paces away, unsure of how to proceed. He wanted to speak, but the words felt like they were stuck in his throat. He had come so far, but now that he was here, he wasn't sure how to make the next move. The Zorath regarded him for a long time, its eyes scanning Leo carefully. Then, to Leo's surprise, the warrior lowered its weapon and took a step toward him. Leo took a deep breath and stood his ground. He was ready this time. "I came to find you," Leo said, his voice steady. "I want to understand. I want to know more about you. About your people." The Zorath's gaze didn't waver, but Leo could see something in its eyes. There was no hostility, no anger, only curiosity. It was as if the warrior was trying to figure out Leo's intentions, just as Leo had been trying to understand the Zorath for so long. For a long time, the warrior didn't respond. It stood there watching Leo, its massive form towering over him. Then slowly, the Zorath extended its hand toward Leo. Leo blinked, confused at first. What was this gesture? Was the warrior offering something? Or was it a test? He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should take the Zorath's hand. But then, remembering everything he had learned so far, he stepped forward and took the warrior's hand. The moment his hand touched the Zorath's, a strange feeling washed over him. Connection, a shared understanding. It wasn't just physical contact. It was as if they were both communicating on a deeper level. Leo could feel the strength in the Zorath's grip, but he also felt something else. Something more gentle, almost reassuring. The Zorath let go of Leo's hand after a moment, and they both stood in silence once more. "I don't know what to say," Leo admitted. "But I know this. Humans and Zorath, we can work together. I believe we can." The warrior seemed to consider his words for a long while. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, it nodded. It wasn't much, but to Leo it was everything. The warrior had accepted him, if only just a little. For the first time since meeting the Zorath, Leo felt a sense of hope. It wasn't just about understanding the markings or learning the ancient stories. It was about trust. Leo had taken a risk, and the Zorath had responded. not with violence or rejection, but with a simple, unspoken understanding. As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Leo knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and the path to true friendship with the Zorath would take time. But for the first time, Leo was certain that it was a road worth traveling. The warrior turned and began to walk away, but this time, Leo wasn't afraid to follow. He knew that with every step they were forging a new path, one that could lead to something much greater than either of them had ever imagined. Over the next few weeks, Leo and the Zorath warrior began to meet regularly. Their encounters were still mostly quiet, but they were becoming more meaningful. Leo had learned that the Zorath communicated through a combination of gestures and body language. While Leo didn't completely understand everything, he was beginning to pick up on the warrior's movements, facial expressions, and the occasional growl or hum that seemed to carry more meaning than he had initially realized. First, the Zorath had been distant. It would show Leo the rock markings, occasionally demonstrate an ancient form of battle movement, and sometimes just stand in silence, observing Leo as he tried to make sense of the new world around him. But as time went on, the warrior seemed more relaxed. It no longer stood as rigidly as it once had. There was a kind of trust developing between them, though it was still fragile. One day, Leo arrived early at their usual meeting spot in the desert. The sun had barely risen, and the sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange. Leo sat by the rock formations, looking out over the vast desert. The peaceful stillness of the morning was a stark contrast to the fierce battles he had heard about in the colony. He wondered what kind of life the Zorath had lived before they had been forced into isolation. Were they all like the warrior he had met? Strong, silent, and fierce? Or were there softer sides to them, hidden deep beneath their warrior-like exterior? As he pondered these questions, he heard the familiar rumble in the distance. His heart skipped a beat, and he stood, looking toward the source of the sound. Sure enough, the Zorath appeared over the horizon, walking steadily toward him. The warrior was even more imposing in the early morning light, its massive frame casting a long shadow across the desert. Leo couldn't help but admire the creature's strength and grace even as he wondered about its past. "Good morning," Leo said, offering a friendly wave. He still didn't know the warrior's name, but he had begun to think of it as something more than just a title. The Zorath had become a companion, a silent partner in his quest to learn more about this strange world. The Zorath acknowledged, Leo with a slight nod, its eyes scanning the surroundings before resting on Leo. It was still difficult to understand all its intentions, but Leo had grown to recognize certain gestures, the way the warrior tilted its head when it was curious, or the way it adjusted its stance when it was ready to engage in something important. "I've been thinking," Leo said as he sat down on a nearby rock. "You don't talk like humans do, but that doesn't mean we can't understand each other. Maybe we could try something different today?" The Zorath stepped closer, watching Leo carefully. Its eyes seemed to gleam with interest, as if it were waiting to see what Leo would do next. "I know a few games from Earth," Leo said, his voice lighter than usual. "Maybe we could try one. It's not about winning or losing, just something to share." He pulled out a small flat stone from his bag and showed it to the Zorath. "It's called rock, paper, scissors," Leo explained with a smile. "You probably don't know it, but it's a fun game." The Zorath's gaze remained focused on Leo, its expression unreadable. Then, in a move that surprised Leo, the warrior extended its hand and mimicked the action Leo had made with his stone. At first, Leo wasn't sure what to make of it. Was the Zorath trying to copy him? Or had it recognized something about the game? But then the warrior made a series of quick movements, its hand forming a fist, then opening up into a flat palm, and finally making a sweeping motion with its arm as if indicating something important. Leo laughed. "I think you're getting it. You're making your own version, huh?" The Zorath didn't reply, but Leo could see the glimmer of something new in its eyes. There was no hostility or suspicion, only curiosity and a willingness to engage. The warrior was trying in its own way to be part of something that humans enjoyed. It was a moment of true connection, a moment that neither of them had expected. For the rest of the morning, Leo and the Zorath played their own version of the game. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. They were communicating even without words, and for Leo that was enough. As they sat in the quiet desert, Leo began to realize just how much this small moment meant. He had come to Zerath with the hope of finding new life, new friends, and new understanding. Now here he was, sitting across from one of the most fearsome creatures in the galaxy, playing a simple game in the desert. It was an experience that was hard to put into words, but it was powerful in its own way. The Zorath stood up, its massive form rising above Leo. It didn't say anything, but the gesture felt like a wordless acknowledgement of their time together. For a brief moment, Leo wondered if the warrior would leave, as it had done in the past. But instead, the Zorath extended its hand once more, offering a new gesture. Leo stared at it for a second, unsure of what to do. But then he smiled, recognizing the gesture as one of trust. It was the same kind of gesture he had seen from the Zorath in their earlier encounters, but this time, it felt different. This time, it was an invitation. "Thank you," Leo said quietly, placing his hand in the Zorath's palm. The warrior gave a slow, deliberate nod, its eyes softer than Leo had ever seen them. With that simple exchange, something profound had happened. The distance that had once separated them, both physically and emotionally, had started to close. It wasn't a sudden change. It wasn't an instant friendship. But it was the beginning of something important. As the sun rose higher, in the sky, Leo and the Zorath stood together side by side looking out over the desert. There was no need for words. The bond between them had already been formed, and it was stronger than any language could describe. Leo knew that the journey ahead would be difficult. The colony was still facing challenges, and there were many unknowns about the Zorath and their true intentions. But for the first time since he had arrived on Zerath, Leo felt hopeful. He wasn't alone anymore. The Zorath, in its own way, had become a friend, and with that thought in mind, Leo turned and began walking back toward the colony, the Zorath warrior following him just a few steps behind. As days turned into weeks, Leo's bond with the Zorath warrior grew stronger. The two of them became an unlikely pair, walking the desert together, sharing quiet moments, and learning from one another. The people in the colony had begun to notice the change. They had seen Leo return day after day, walking with the giant alien by his side. They had heard the stories of his peaceful encounters with the Zorath, and began to whisper in awe and concern. Some were amazed by the courage Leo showed, while others were skeptical, unsure if the Zorath could truly be trusted. But Leo didn't mind. He had learned that trust was built, one step at a time. And the Zorath, despite its fierce appearance, had shown nothing but respect for him. Yet not everyone in the colony shared Leo's optimism. There were still some who believed that the Zorath were a danger, that their history of violence and war could not be overlooked. They didn't want to believe that the Zorath could change, or that a human could bridge the gap between the two species. One evening, as Leo sat by the campfire outside the colony, a group of colonists approached him. They were a mix of worried faces and stern expressions. "Leo," said Captain Harris, one of the leaders of the colony, "we need to talk." Leo looked up, sensing the tension in the air. The firelight flickered in the night, casting long shadows on the faces of the colonists. "What's going on?" Leo asked, standing up. "We've been discussing your relationship with the Zorath," Captain Harris said, his tone serious. "And we've come to a conclusion. We can't keep ignoring the danger." Leo frowned, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "What danger?" "The Zorath have done nothing to harm us. They've helped us in ways you can't even imagine." Harris shook his head. "You don't understand, Leo. We know their history. We know what they're capable of. And we can't just stand by and let them roam freely on this planet." The colonists around them nodded, some murmuring their agreement. "We've decided it's best if you sever ties with the Zorath," Harris said firmly. "For the safety of the colony. Leo felt a wave of frustration and disbelief wash over him. You can't be serious. After everything we've been through, after everything the Zorath have done for us, you want me to turn my back on them? This isn't personal, Leo, Harris replied. It's about the safety of everyone. Here. If the Zorath are allowed to stay, they might turn on us at any moment. We can't risk it. Leo's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that some of the colonists were frightened, but this felt like a betrayal. The Zorath had done nothing to show they were dangerous, yet the fear of the unknown had taken hold of the colony, and now they wanted to force him to choose between his new friend and the people he had sworn to protect. I can't do that, Leo said, his voice shaking with emotion. I can't turn my back on someone who's become a friend. The Zorath have shown nothing but kindness, and I believe they're capable of more than you think. Captain Harris stepped closer, his face hardening. We can't take that chance, Leo. We've made our decision. Either you sever your ties with the Zorath, or we'll have to take matters into our own hands. The weight of those words hit Leo like a hammer. He had heard the stories. He knew what the colony was capable of when they felt threatened. And if the Zorath were pushed into a corner, he couldn't be sure what might happen. He had seen the warrior's strength, its power. But Leo had also seen its kindness, its willingness to learn. I won't abandon them, Leo said, his voice steady. If you try to hurt the Zorath, you'll be making a mistake. With those words, Leo turned and walked away from the group, leaving behind the heavy silence of the campfire. As he walked toward the outskirts of the colony, his mind raced. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't stand by and let the people he had come to know and care about make a decision that could cost him everything: his friendship with the Zorath, and potentially the future of the colony. He didn't know where to go or what to do, but he knew he couldn't let this be the end. He had come to Zerath with a purpose: to make connections, to bring people and creatures together. He wasn't about to give up on that now. As he reached the edge of the colony, he saw a familiar figure standing in the distance, watching him. The Zorath warrior. The giant alien had been waiting for him. Leo walked toward the warrior, his heart heavy but determined. He needed the Zorath's help. He couldn't face this challenge alone. I didn't want it to come to this, Leo said quietly as he approached the warrior. The colony. They want to force you out. They think you're a threat. The Zorath said nothing, but Leo could feel the tension in the air. The warrior was listening, absorbing every word. I know you didn't come here to hurt anyone, Leo continued. But if we don't do something, we might both lose everything. The Zorath bent down, lowering its head to Leo's level. For the first time, Leo saw something new in the warrior's eyes, an understanding, a silent promise. I won't let them hurt you, Leo said, looking up at the giant alien. We'll find a way. The Zorath nodded slowly. It didn't speak, but the gesture was enough. They were in this together. Leo had never been more certain of anything in his life. As the night grew darker, Leo and the Zorath stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The colony had made its decision, but Leo had made his own. He wasn't going to let fear control their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, Leo felt ready. He had found a friend, in the most unlikely of places, and he wasn't about to let that friendship slip away. The day after Leo's conversation with the Zorath warrior, things in the colony had become tense. Captain Harris had made it clear that the colonists had no intention of backing down. They feared the Zorath, and their fear had grown into something far stronger: anger. Leo knew that the situation could turn dangerous, especially if the Zorath was pushed too far. The warriors of this species were not known for their patience, and their history of battles was not something to ignore. Leo spent the night thinking about what he could do to stop the situation from escalating. He had tried to explain to the colonists that the Zorath was not a threat, but the fear of the unknown was strong. The people who had come to this planet with him were good, hard-working people, but they were scared, and fear often led to rash decisions. He couldn't let that happen. As dawn broke, Leo made his decision. He would not just stand by and hope things worked out. He had to act. If he was going to save the Zorath and the colony, he needed to act fast before things got out of hand. approached the warrior, who was waiting for him by the edge of the desert. The Zorath stood tall as always, its piercing eyes scanning the horizon. It had been quiet since their last meeting, and Leo knew it was waiting for him to make the next move. "I need your help," Leo said, his voice firm. "The colony is going to attack you if we don't do something. They won't listen to reason. They're too scared." The Zorath tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. Leo could see the anger beneath the surface. The warrior was not used to being treated like a threat, and Leo could feel the warrior's frustration. But there was also a glimmer of understanding in the Zorath's gaze. The warrior understood the danger they both faced. "I know you don't want to fight," Leo said, his words slow and careful. "But if the colony comes for you, we won't have a choice. I need you to trust me. We can stop this together." The Zorath stepped closer, its massive form towering over Leo. For a moment, Leo was unsure what the warrior was thinking. But then, without warning, the Zorath dropped to one knee, lowering itself to be at eye level with Leo. It was a gesture of respect, something Leo had never expected to see. It showed that the Zorath was willing to listen, willing to trust him, despite everything. "Thank you," Leo said quietly, placing a hand on the Zorath's massive arm. "We're going to find a way to stop this. We're going to show the colony that we can work together." Leo had a plan, though it was risky. He knew that he couldn't stop the colonists from doing what they thought was right. But maybe he could show them that the Zorath was not their enemy. If he could get the Zorath to demonstrate its strength and leadership in a controlled way, it might just change the minds of the colonists. If they saw that the Zorath could help, rather than hurt, maybe they would understand. The warrior nodded, as if understanding Leo's plan, and together they made their way toward the colony. By the time they reached the gates, the sun had risen higher, casting a bright light over the settlement. The tension in the air was thick, and Leo could see the nervousness in the eyes of the colonists as they prepared for whatever was to come. The soldiers were on alert, ready for action. Captain Harris was standing by the gates, his face set in, a hard expression. When he saw Leo and the Zorath approaching, his eyes widened. He quickly stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "Leo, what are you doing?" he demanded. "You need to stay away from that creature. It's too dangerous." Leo stood tall, facing Harris. "You don't understand. Captain, the Zorath is not our enemy. I've spent weeks with this warrior, and I know that it's not here to hurt us." "Enough of this," Harris snapped. "You're risking all of us for a creature we know nothing about. We won't let. You put the colony in danger." Leo's heart sank. The fear in Harris's voice was clear, but Leo refused to back down. He turned to the Zorath, who had remained silent but had not made any aggressive moves. The warrior looked down at Leo, and for the first time, Leo saw a flicker of something else in the Zorath's eyes. Sadness. The warrior didn't want this fight either. "Please," Leo said, his voice steady. "Let me prove it to you. Let me show you that we can work together." Without waiting for a response, Leo motioned for the Zorath to step forward. The warrior moved slowly, carefully, until it was standing in the center of the colony. The colonists watched, their hands on their weapons, unsure of what would happen next. "Listen to me," Leo called out to the crowd. "I know you're all scared. I know that the Zorath are powerful and you think they're dangerous, but I've spent time with this warrior, and I can promise you that they're not here to harm us. They're here because they want peace." The Zorath stood still, waiting for Leo to continue. "I know it's hard to believe," Leo went on, "but we can't judge them based on what we fear. We have to look at who they are, not just what they've done in the past. The Zorath are not our enemies. We can work with them. We can build something together." The crowd was silent. Leo could see the doubt in their eyes, but he could also see something else, a glimmer of hope. They were listening. "Show them, Zorath," Leo said quietly. "Show them who you really are." The Zorath stepped forward, raising its arm in a powerful gesture. The warrior's eyes glowed with an intensity that was hard to ignore, but there was no anger in them. The Zorath slowly lowered its weapon and knelt, bowing its head in a gesture of respect. The crowd gasped. This was not the creature they had feared. This was a warrior showing humility, showing that it could be more than just a fighter. It could be a leader, a protector. Captain Harris stepped forward, his hand still on his weapon, but there was hesitation in his movements. "What is this? What are you trying to prove?" Leo smiled, his heart swelling with hope. "That we can all work together." The tension that had filled the air began to fade. The colonists slowly lowered their weapons, unsure but willing to listen. "This is our future," Leo said. "We don't have to live in fear. We can build something better, something stronger, if we trust each other." For a long moment there was silence. Then, one by one, the colonists began to lower their weapons completely. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had lessened. Leo had done it. He had shown them that the Zorath could be trusted. The Zorath warrior stood, and for the first time Leo saw a full expression of gratitude in its eyes. The battle had been avoided. The colony and the Zorath were on the path to something better. It wasn't going to be easy, but Leo knew this was only the beginning, and together they would face whatever came next.